proposal in this case simply is to construct a self-storage warehouse or a storage unit project in the corner of Del Monte Road and Arrowhead Trail. That particular use is a conditional use in the industrial 2 zone. That's how the property is zoned, and as such, we have public hearings, we solicit public comment, and specifically the Planning Commission is charged to review the proposal to see if it's necessary to impose any conditions to mitigate any foreseeable adverse or detrimental impact that the conditional use might have on the area, maybe on adjacent properties or adjacent neighborhoods and that type of a thing. So we spent quite a bit of time discussing the project from that particular perspective 2 weeks ago. And with that in mind, I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. There were a couple of very specific things that I believe the commission said they wanted to see relative to revisions of the applicant's plans. And I think the applicants have addressed at least the 2 biggest things that we talked about 2 weeks ago. The applicants have modified the proposed architecture for the office structure and also for the buildings that'll line the east and the south elevations of the project. And I'll just describe things this way. The original architectural designs, if you can just pull up the new ones that we have, that'd be great. The original ones, in my mind, you can picture this, kind of had an architectural style or theme that would match the ridge townhomes out across from the neighborhood Walmart on the east end of town. And I believe, yeah, that's what we had reviewed 2 weeks ago. We heard that the neighbors, this is my interpretation of what we heard at least, would prefer to see architecture that more closely matched the homes that exist in the neighborhood that's on the other side of Del Monte to the east of this property. And again, just speaking for myself, I believe the applicants have done a good job of modifying the plans going from what we saw a second ago to this, to give it, not only more of a residential look, but also in terms of materials and colors and some of the accents and things like that. Just a little bit more commonality with what exists to the east.
So the top left is what would face the road, is that correct? East elevation?
Yes. Also, the applicants have removed the signage that I had understood would be located on this building. And maybe to touch on the last really big change relative to the walls, so going maybe, Mike, to that image there. The previous, so this is really the back wall of a building that will face Arrowhead Trail. It did not have any change of roof line on the previous proposal. This one does, and also has a little bit more relief than what was shown on the previous wall, just to make that look like less of a long blank expanse. Again, that is what I heard the applicants, or I'm sorry, the neighbors who commented in the public hearing say that they would prefer to see. So in short, then, I really believe the applicants have taken the comments that were offered. They've worked to address those. They're really just 2 issues. Let me mention one other thing. They've provided a lighting plan as well, which for a project like this, I think is very important. And just again,
we can't really read much on that
Even if you really blow it up, you can't?
No.
Okay.
It's fuzzy, unless I'm just needing new glasses.
It's probably fuzzy.
Very true, very fuzzy.
It clearly demonstrates that the light levels as you approach the property lines do approach 0, which is what we're looking for, where we're particularly concerned about potentially having light spillover and that type of thing. In fact, I believe that the street lights on Del Monte Road that'll be installed on the west side of the street likely would have more light pollution and might be more aggravating for neighbors than any lighting coming from this project. Also in the last meeting, we talked about how to deal with the west property line on this project where just in the recent past, a ditch has been piped. There's some question about what we can build over that ditch. So Mike, I don't know if you can pull up just the site plan, but
I can put you on the full site plan.
that one's fine, I think. So it's still a little bit in flux right here relative to whether the wall that the applicants are required to build around the perimeter, so this is a 6-foot tall masonry wall, either be constructed where they've shown it on this image, which would be some 15 feet. I think it gets a little bit closer to the property line in some places than that, from the property line and offset from a really big pipe that's underground through here, with landscaping then in that area, do trees spaced in a certain spacing and some things like that. Or if it would be better to install the wall on the property line. Staff is still kind of investigating what those options are. In my view, this scenario probably is the most likely and the best way to treat that. We don't generally like to create narrow corridors of space that doesn't really get accessed much and doesn't get utilized. But for a couple of different reasons, I think having that fence offset from the pipe, having that area landscaped and treated that way is probably best. The last thing that I just mentioned, and I'll say this with applicants here tonight, so Mr. Menlove, everybody else, signage. I don't know what you have in mind, so my suggestion is to limit signage to monument signs. So our code would allow, actually for signs that might be bigger than that, but I would suggest that the applicants be permitted to have a 6-foot tall, yes, it would be a 6-foot tall monument sign with a total copy area of 48 square feet on both Del Monte someplace and on Arrowhead Trail. Our ordinance allows for one sign of that nature per frontage, but that they be limited to that kind of signage, or that amount at least of signage.
Meaning then no signage at all on the walls?
I think that's what we were,
Okay.
yes, so I think it'd be probably most appropriate to mention that as a condition of approval as well, so. So those are the changes, a little update on the wall issue. Again, that's something we're still working through, but I think, it's gonna be one of those two scenarios, either the wall is gonna be on the property line or it's gonna be offset. In any event, there will be 10 feet of landscaping, if not more, along that boundary, whether it's kind of internal to the project or on the outside. And as we did a couple of weeks ago, staff does recommend that the proposed conditional use be approved, with perhaps some of the things that I mentioned just a moment ago being addressed.
One thing that came up last time was the garbage receptacle, whether they have one or not. Did the city have a recommendation there?
Boy, I don't, honestly.
Both points
I
was
might
quite
defer
valid,
To your wisdom there. We've struggled with that a little bit on some other projects. And I think we've been most successful really leaving that up to the property owner. So if they feel, for example, like a black can, just akin to what we have at our homes, is adequate to take care of
Office.
of their needs, we've allowed people just to operate that way.
But they would be required to still have at least that, is that what you're saying?
Nobody's ever asked if we would make them do that or not. So I don't know that we do require necessarily a receptacle on site.
I think the thing I like about the black can is it still gives a place for them to take care of their trash, but it's not so big that they're going to get a shade thrown into there or some other big, TV box or something like that, so.
You could certainly make that a condition of approval. I will say this, if they ever decide to put a dumpster on the site, then that does have to be enclosed. We've got some very specific
For the city
criteria
standards.
for that enclosure, and whether they delivered the dumpster now, or if they did it in 5 years and we became aware that it was there, we'd
Yeah.
work with them to make that happen, so. So yeah, I
I think
apologize.
they had some very valid points of why they wouldn't want it.
Yeah,
It could be be as detrimental as favorable.
I think intuitively, I
It would
think
just fill up so fast.
you
so-
should have it, right? I mean, that's my initial thought, but I can see the other perspective as well.
Yeah, I can too. Okay, any other questions for staff or?
Just one, I really like the south elevation with the different heights that they've done to accent it. And I'm just wondering why, oh, the east shows it too. I thought that there was a view a second ago where the east was flat.
No, that's the old. We had the old up
Okay,
above
okay.
versus the
Perfect.
modified.
So they're both consistent, great. Okay, I was looking at the old one, wasn't I? On your screen.
Yep.
Okay, looks
Can I show
good.
you the difference?
So is that pipeline, is that an irrigation line?
Yes.
A
So
really
if you
big
talk,
one.
if you talk to those irrigation company on that?
Not specific about this, but they do have an easement that has to be 15 feet off center, and you can't plant trees or do a wall
Okay,
in
well, that's
that
what I was
area.
gonna say, so it's gotta come off so far.
Yeah, before you can plant a tree. So yeah, 15 feet.
That shows it,
I'd
that shows
use
it on the
They've
landscape.
respected that with the site plan that we just looked
Okay.
at.
What about the road coming into it? Show me that again, the road coming into the project.
Yeah. just- I got 50 screens up. Tom?
So has that got a turning lane coming both ways, coming off one side and off the other, so it's easy access for people to go around them when they're coming into that? You know what I mean?
It will. I mean, it's a collector road, so we got a
Yes,
center
yeah.
center median and a.
So it's not stopping, that's a pretty heavily populated road. So there ought to be a turning section to get into that.
Well, it's a 3-lane facility. We haven't had this designed with a turn lane, for example, though, an additional turn lane for right-hand turns into the project.
There's no turn pocket or anything, so they can veer off and then make the turn into the project.
Well, I could see that being a little bit of a concern.
Typically, with the right-hand movement, you don't have a conflict. So unless there's somebody that has traffic backed up, to get into the project, you wouldn't have another movement that would impede somebody from making an immediate right and not slowing things down. Now, to make the left, if you're northbound and want to turn left into the site, if you don't have a turn lane there and you have southbound traffic holding things up, then you could impede traffic and cause things to back up to the south. But I don't see the same issue if you're southbound and want to make a right into the project.
I just
It could
noticed
happen,
there's-
certainly.
There's a lot of traffic there, especially in the morning and afternoon. Not too much during the, it comes into a red light, so there's a reason for that.
And if you had 20 patrons of this facility that all got here at the same time, then I think what you're talking about, could certainly be an issue. And maybe that's something that we should look into more closely.
What's the future of that road as far as the ability? Will it always just be one lane each way?
With a center turn lane.
Okay, well, that's all I got.
Any other questions? This is a public hearing, so I'd entertain a motion to move into public hearing.
Make a motion.
Second?
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, this is the opportunity for anybody here from the public to come and address the commission. If you'll come forward and state your name. We try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, and if there's any comments that somebody else has previously made, if you'll just say, I agree with so-and-so, that'd be great. And then you don't have to cover the same thing. So anybody here to address the commission on this particular item?
Hi, your commissioners. I'm Josh Galvez. I live in the Academy Park community just down the road from where this is proposed. And we've had a number of discussion amongst community members, some concerns about the traffic this will bring to the area. We feel like this kind of use probably fits better closer down towards the freeway. But particularly as I look at the exit of this facility out onto Del Monte, I foresee people with trailers or people pulling out into that road. It's a fairly narrow road. There's 2 lanes right there. I can see people using the storage and pulling out there and blocking a lot of traffic, which happens all the time, even with just cars trying to pull out of the neighborhoods to the north of it. There's people trying to pull left, and they often can't get out. And as the extra traffic this would bring, in addition to what the MATC already has, I foresee some challenges there. Beyond that, like I said, there's been a number of discussion amongst the community. We are glad to see that the style of the exterior has been changed to match for more like the homes that are in the area. That fits a lot better and is a lot more pleasing to than what was previously shown. But those are some of our concerns, at least from my family, my wife, and the others that we've talked with and down the road.
Great, thank you for coming and expressing that.
Thanks, Josh.
Just meet to the end of the, or to where it turns it and then goes back.
My name's Sean Knobman, and I think it's really relevant. I live in the area as well. It's relevant that there's the Sunrock and the IFA over there, but I think what's most important is the Revere farther down that road. If we look at 400 South into Springville and the kind of growth that's happened on 400 South and the quality of it, 8,000 is most like 400 just a few years ago. We lived off of 400 4 years ago, and we saw that growth and the sudden traffic lights, and now the Smiths and the sports park that they're putting in, recreation center, and it's been really awesome on 400 South. Now we moved here, and my wife and I have talked, wow, 8,000 is going to do what 400 did. But 400 didn't have a storage facility. There's a reason why you need a conditional permit for facilities like this, is because it's intended to be a little bit more out of the way. And if you think of IFA and Sunrock, they've been there for a long time, and that's kind of old 8,000. New 8,000 is the Revere Health. And one of these things is not like the other. What's going in on Revere, or what went in on Revere, invites like-kind development near it. And this will do the same. And right now, when you take that left past this, you have very nice homes to your right, and then you have the MATC building. It's a school, and you continue down the road and you get to another school. And so we're going down a road that takes us to 2 schools. There's homes that already back up and front those schools all over. And now with the storage facility, it obviously is going to affect the property values of those people. I don't live near them. I don't live right next to this. I'm just thinking down the road, what kind of 8,000 do we want? And the decisions that we make right now will influence what goes on 8,000. And this corner, this intersection corner right here, coming up from whatever that main highway is called, I'm still new to Spanish Fork, and turning right on Arrowhead, right? As you come up there, this is going to be a prime spot for something in the future, and lots of things around it. And if we throw a storage center down right now, then we are choosing how we want 8,000 to continue from a domino standpoint. And so my impression is that if this is already zoned to need a permit, that there's a good reason for it, and we should take a long look at what we want 8,000 to become. Not just because of Clark and Gower's property values, whoever they are, but because we've got an entire street that's going to, in the next 3 to 5 years, really blow up. Almost all that land on that corridor is for sale. I've heard that Walmart owns some land near the freeway, and so we just want to, preserve the road. There are going to be lots of side streets off of there, especially near the water filtration center. There's going to be lots of light industrial area there that we'd be more than happy to have storage. There's got to be land over there to put storage units. But 8,000 itself and this particular intersection it's the intersection closest to 2 schools. Is that the intersection that deserves a storage facility of all the intersections on 8,000? And with all the traffic that ALA gets in the morning and in the afternoon, I would say no to granting this permit for this particular intersection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thanks, John.
Is there anybody else from the community?
I'm Arlen Alt, and I just live to the southwest. I know that road gets very populated in the mornings and in the nights, school pickups and that. One other thing is they piped that ditch behind my house also. And my understanding is you cannot build anything on that ditch, fences or anything, so.
I think that's the way it's
Yeah.
developed, shown now, currently, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Solid.
Thanks, Harlan.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to exit public hearing.
Motion to exit public hearing.
Got a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Great, thank you. Any further conversation or discussion? It seemed like the items of discussion tonight had to do with traffic, and then it's just the appropriateness of the use. I think that's what John had indicated. So let me take a second. We didn't do as good a job tonight educating as we did last time, so let me just do a little bit of that educating. This property is zoned industrial 2 currently. It has been for how many years, Dave? Do we know?
More than 13.
More than 13. Is there magical? Because that's when you started here, okay. Okay, I got it. And within that industrial 2 zoning, there is a requirement for a facility like this as a permitted use, but it requires a conditional use, which based on state law says basically it's a permitted use that we cannot deny. Okay, and that's, and I don't know that I disagree with you, John, in terms of the appropriateness of this use, but because of its industrial zoning that's been there, the city doesn't normally, in fact, I don't know if in 6 years of being on the Planning Commission, I've ever seen the city make an application to have a zone changed on its own merit because the city thought it was better to be zoned that way. It's really based on the desires of the community or of the landowner to change that zoning. And even if we did change it, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but we'd probably get sued if we tried to change it on our own merit. And so that's not something that the city typically tries to do, right?
If you'd like me to explain.
Please do. Yep. You do a better job than I do. You're a paid talker. Gotcha. Most of the time.
So basically, because it's currently zoned I2, Industrial 2, and an application has been submitted and the application is midway through the process. Because of that, that's why we would get sued, because at this point, they are what's called vested, meaning they have a right to that property and they have a right to do something with that property. As you indicated, Bruce, that the property itself, storage units are a conditional use. Like John mentioned, I understand the idea that storage units aren't the best thing necessarily to go in there. However, the way our code reads, we have to allow basically anything that fits into our conditional use or any of the other permitted uses in I2. Now, I2 has a lot of things that most people probably would not want in that neighborhood. There are a lot of industrial uses that would be very intensive on the property and very much detrimental to everybody. And those are straight permitted uses. Those aren't even things that would be conditional. Something like this, it will have, it has some impacts, of course. It does. Traffic being a major issue here.
Do you have an example of something that's not even, that's conditional? That
What would
they
be a
could just-
permitted use?
They could actually just do it without approval?
Concrete batch plant? I mean, is that? That's the first thing that came to my mind, sorry.
I think that, wasn't there something like that?
Because there
I
used to
think
be
there was like a crush plant or
Asphalt
something.
batch plant.
That's what it was.
I mean, there's a lot of uses that are just straight permitted. They're not even
Yeah.
conditional. Conditional use does mean that it's an allowed use. It's just that's where you get to put the conditions on there.
Basically, it's our job to evaluate the impacts of that use on the surrounding neighborhood and then do what we can to try and mitigate those negative impacts. Is that correct?
That's exactly right on. And a number of those impacts have been talked about, especially today. Del Monte Road is a very busy road, as you all know, at least 2 times a day. MATC down at the other end of that road, and then you've got Quail Hollow folks that live down in there. There's a lot of traffic that goes through there, and that's something to definitely consider. That is an impact. Now, you have to try to mitigate that as best you can. Some of their proposals, I think, they address a little bit of it. The walls, I think what was talked about last time, where the architecture and the walls, you guys wanted something that was more appealing to the eye, essentially. These are not necessarily the most beautiful looking things sometimes, and the applicant has tried to address those concerns. They have also tried to make the office building look more like the surrounding community and more like a house, essentially. Now, is it a house? No, it's not, but there may be a person that lives there a good portion of the time, so.
So Jason, you know, we can't stop something like that, but as a planning commission, we can make sure that they do designs better, landscaping better. And there's also another issue on this property is the geotech study on what can get built here. This is something that can get built here because of what used to be there. And, you know, John, I know, you know, you guys, you know, my issue was the traffic. Other than that, I think, you know, I think that this building, the way they're doing it now, and the landscaping and everything else will fit into the look of your community. But, you know, if they went back and put a batch plan in there or something like that, I mean, you surely wouldn't want that. And I don't care how many type of walls or anything else that you put up there for a batch plant, you're not going to have the same type of look and uniformity and beautification that this place is getting built. And this thing will fit into that little area so well and meet the geotech studies and everything else that was, you know, because of what was there before. I can't think of anything else that would really go in there better that would match that geotech study, you know, John, and I know you have a concern about that. My concern is more or less just the traffic.
Are there conditions with the traffic? I mean, it seems like.
Yep. Thank you. We get yelled at, so. Yeah.
My name's Sean, I'm sorry, which
You're
means
fine.
John. My mother saw Goldfinger when she was 14 and decided her firstborn son would be Sean, so here I am. 13 years later, he really had an impact on her, Sean Connery did. I feel like we've talked a lot about the traffic on Del Monte, and I guess what I'm wondering is if there is a traffic issue, and we're talking about a center turn lane or what is there and what isn't there, it sounds like that's the one issue that's been brought up that hasn't been addressed very much. They've improved the look, they've improved the landscaping. It passes the geotech, but there's still the traffic issue, and it's not just traffic, it's school traffic, and increasingly the students that go to ALA live there and walk to these homes that are across the street. And so that's a concern that I have. In our estimation, rather than fill in MATC to this corner with commercial or industrial, we'd obviously prefer, because of the kids walking, that it was filled with homes, and then maybe even like a gas station on the corner. I mean, something, but. MATC has already altered to all their students and given parking passes to every one of their students free, so that they no longer parked on that interior road into the Academy Park neighborhood in order to kind of be good neighbors. And so we're thinking, if we're talking about traffic and that's our concern, how are they mitigating that?
But John, if this was a residential, an R12 or an R15, even an R15, wouldn't there be more traffic coming out of that than there would be now with this storage unit?
More traffic?
Ask Ken about it.
Sure. I don't care. I'm just saying, I'm just, with what's coming into this, it seems like it'd be less than if it was an R15 or...
Number of trips and time of day.
Yeah.
So my name is Ken Menlove. I'm sort of the applicant. Ken Berg was originally, but he kind of retired. But yeah, as far as storage units go, I'm also a professional engineer, civil engineer. A storage unit facility of this size will generate about 50 trips per day. So a trip is showing up is one trip and leaving is a second trip. So it's the equivalent of basically 25 cars per day for a facility of this size. And a home, one residence in Spanish Fork or anywhere on average will generate about 10 trips per day.
One home?
One home. So it's the equivalent of about 5 homes. So of all commercial uses in the traffic, you know, you can look in traffic almanacs or any of the studies, of all the commercial uses, storage units are by far the lowest. So when we do impact studies, traffic studies, and also when cities calculate impact fees for transportation fees and things like that, they don't even have a category as low as storage units. And so we always have to provide them with a trip count or what we call a trip memo.
And that was my question, you know, I mean, for something that's being built right now for your area, this is probably the less impact onto traffic than anything that could be possibly put in. I mean, if a Walmart came in or a Smith's or something like that, like you said you moved from, gee, think about the impact on the traffic there.
I mean, even a
Gas station would be about almost 1,200,
Well,
1,400 trips.
while
a
you're
day.
up here, let me ask you this. Have you guys considered, or at any point, considered approaching the city to have it rezoned to commercial or to a residential? Or from the get-go, have you guys been set on putting storage units at this location?
Yeah, that's the owner's decision. I haven't been involved in that, but
We bought it to store.
yeah.
You bought it for this purpose? Okay.
Based on the studies and the feasibility studies and everything else, it's an ideal location, also based on the geotech study. And as far as the turning in and out of the facility, most storage unit facilities that we build today, during the peak hours, if there might be 2 or 3 cars coming in the middle of the day, when the manager's there, which they're there from during the hours of operation, they usually leave the gate open. So the gate is usually in the up position. So if someone comes in, they can drive into the facility and check in. But if 3 cars show up at once, there's never a problem if someone forgets their code. Usually the gate is in the up position during certain peak times.
Is there enough width on that driveway for 2 vehicles, so one leaving, one coming?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, meets fire department standards. And in this case, the gate's in there about 60 feet off the property line. So this is a really good gate location.
Right there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's
Yeah,
plenty of,
If you look at that width there, that's 30 feet.
30 feet, yeah.
Probably about the same.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit narrower.
It's very convenient, but traffic is by far the lowest, storage units produce the lowest traffic impact of any commercial use.
Currently, that road, Del Monte, at that location's 2 lanes, right? But it's being widened to 3 lanes, or it is currently 3 lanes?
It's a very narrow
don't
2
know.
lanes. Let me measure it really quick.
So I'm just curious if part of the development process would be to widen that road.
Yeah, what would be
They-
the time
they
frame
will.
of that?
I mean, that's new curb and gutter, is it not? Will that then maintain the right of
It'll
way
be
width?
widened like 3 or 4 feet, and then you have the curb that's, 20-something inches on top of that. Sidewalk.
Yeah, so there's a sidewalk running right here.
As you get towards the intersection. Yeah. And I said something before that might be a little bit misleading. I appreciate Mr. Clark pointing out that when this is originally built, it probably would not be striped for 3 lanes. In fact, I'm almost certain that it wouldn't. But with this particular cross-section, there's enough room so that if we ever did have an intersection that warranted that left-hand turn lane, we'd simply go in, reduce the shoulder size, and stripe for that turn lane. So just to be clear about that.
We wouldn't allow for any parking on the east and south side, or, I mean, you wouldn't be on the other side anyway.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't allow any road parking around that.
We would. I
And
think.
We
Del
would
Monte,
allow
yeah.
it?
That's the shoulder here.
Up until the point at which maybe when we had a turn lane in and we start eating into that shoulder, this is plenty wide for 2 lanes of travel and parking on both sides. I don't know who would park there, given just kind of, but we probably wouldn't red curb it or sign it no parking or do anything like that.
One last little question. I'm sure this has been discussed, and so somebody knows, and I just don't know why the entrance is on Del Monte and not on the main.
Arrowhead Trail is a UDOT facility, and they would not allow an access point onto a UDOT facility. So that's,
Hey, John, stay right, throw up throw up the landscape, the one that you just, I want people to look at this. This is good stuff.
All right, hold on, I gotta find it.
So while he's bringing that up, I got the list of other permitted use facilities that could go on this location. I'll just read a few of them. So you've got an automotive, and this is permitted use. They wouldn't need a conditional permit for any of these. An automotive repair, car wash, contractor warehouse, financial institution, impound yard, lube centers, lumber and building material yard, office supply, copying, printing business, offices, outdoor display.
you skip number 8.
Number 8's a long one. Oh, I better read it though. Manufacturing and assembly of finished products except animal fats and oils, ammunition, and those manufacturing uses listed as conditional uses. So manufacturing and assembly uses there. Research, development, and testing services, restaurants, retail businesses, telecommunication towers, not taller than 60 feet, but you could put a 59-foot telecommunication tower there. Tire care centers, trade or business schools, trucking, warehousing, and wholesale trade businesses, except explosives or automobile wrecking and salvage yards. So those are our choices. And then under conditional use, you've got outdoor storage areas and seasonal sales and special events.
But I see this landscape, and I really like, I mean, that really makes that corner look good now. It really, you know.
Do you have any pictures of the north and the west elevations?
Currently, as it is, or as it will be?
As it will be, of the fences. So is that,
That's what you're seeing. That's what you
the
will
question
see.
was asked about if we had any elevations of the north or west, and
Minus
it would
the-
be a masonry fence. Is that 6-foot-high
be-
masonry fence, similar to what you have around most of the concrete, fence that you have around most residential neighborhoods?
So minus the landscaping, that's about what you're gonna see.
Yep.
It'll be a solid fence, right?
Yeah, solid masonry fence. Yep.
I assume that fence will match the rest of the building, the rest of the
Solid
facility.
masonry or precast, concrete stained, look like stone. And it does have trees there, I think, on the north as well.
Yeah, the landscape plan does show trees going all the way around it.
It's all the way around.
automotive repair zone include an auto body?
I don't think so. Oh, it does? Okay. So,
Does that change your mind?
hold on, sorry. So, we actually are out of public hearing, but I'll let you come up and ask your question. You were late, so.
Yeah. Does the development plan...
Tell us your name, sorry.
Josh Anderson.
Hi, Josh.
Does it include the master plan roadway section for Arrowhead Trail? That's UDOT right-of-way, and it's required to develop the lot to put in the curb and gutter as a UDOT roadway section?
Yes.
It does?
As far as
Because it doesn't look as wide as the other
so let me pull up a map.
there.
It'll show.
So,
Josh, you're speaking a foreign language for most of us, so. So we'll let you kind of.
So there's the right of way for the road. You can see the white lines here.
Right.
And they'll be required to meet whatever I can pull up the cross section, what it will look like. But yeah, they'll improve it to meet that.
okay. And then the section to Del Monte Road, you brought up a roadway section that's 90 feet wide. Based on slopes and current grading that's there, that's going to go, 90 feet goes a long ways into that lot, not
You're talking this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so so there's not gonna be a trail on that side, it'll be sidewalk on both, just precedent of what's already there. And then,
So is that an exception that we're allowing? As the city, are you allowing that exception?
yeah. We discussed laying it out along here, and based on what's existing, it'd be a really tough place to put a trail. Because at the end, right here, there's nowhere to put it. We'd have to basically redo this entire section to put a trail in, and we don't want a trail to end nowhere.
Okay.
So that's the idea.
Rationale behind it.
So the trail goes to a 5, and this will basically be a sidewalk and then a bunch of landscaping all the way back to where their wall is.
And it includes the 12-foot drainage swale?
Yeah, well, and they have a, I'm getting lost on all my plans here. There it is. Let's go down to the drainage plan here. So it shows sidewalk, and then it comes to a drainage swell, and then back here for the wall. So cross-section is a little different because we're requiring so much landscaping that it doesn't really fit our cross-section, but it's better than our cross-section because we're requiring so much more landscaping. Usually it's only a 12-foot planter, 5-foot walk, and then a 4-foot planter, and then a wall. This is a...
That's detention pond, not landscaping.
Well, if you look at the...
That's, yes, based on the maintenance of the other 2 detention ponds in Mill, sorry, subdivision called Old Mill? Old Mill Estates. This one ought to look awesome.
It will look awesome.
Because it's full of silt and everything within 10 feet of the drainage area of the detention basin is dead.
So on that real quick, we're tearing the entire thing out of that and we're redoing
Again?
it. Yeah.
Yes. Tax dollars at work. So then, can you pull up the road section for the
Yep.
UDOT
Monty.
road?
Oh, for the UDOT road.
So on that, there's just going to be a sidewalk on each side of the road on Del Monte instead of a
Yes.
sidewalk and a trail?
Yes. That was discussed with Seth Perrins and Chris Thompson. That's what they've decided. Yeah.
There's not room on the east for the trail to make it opposite, huh?
It's already in, then it goes off the hill down to people's backyards.
Yeah.
So,
So do you have a section of Arrowhead?
yeah.
That's how it,
So that's the way Arrowhead will be improved. Okay. All right, that's it. Thanks.
thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
So these standards are on our website under construction standards. There's drawings of all these if you want to look at them.
So I'm going to make a quick statement because last time I was kind of rude and I wanted to apologize. As from architect to architect, I said that the architecture sucks and I apologize. That was a little rude on my part. It wasn't that it was bad architecture, it was just not appropriate for its location. So I want to be, eat a little bit of my ego. So architects don't have any ego, do we? So. I guess the only thing, my question is for you, Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind coming up, not you, Dave Anderson, not Josh Anderson, thank you. That's the joy of having a common name, right? Like Anderson. On the signage part of it, one of the comments I think that was made last time was trying to limit any signage with any lighting on that Del Monte Road. Is that an appropriate thing to still consider as a condition of approval? Just what I'm worried about is the light coming from that signage into the neighborhood that's adjacent to the east.
That's been handled different ways. In the past, we've completely eliminated, like any kind of external illumination, we've completely eliminated people's ability to use any kind of internal illumination.
In my experience,
And we've used
internal.
hours of operation.
Okay.
So people could have a lighted sign or something like that up to a certain hour of the day, and then it has to be turned off.
I mean, usually externally illuminated is better because it absorbs.
downlit, right.
It's downlit, it absorbs it differently than an internally illuminated sign, and that's what I don't want to see on that, just because I think that's the one negative impact I don't think that we've addressed in all this conversation yet. So that's just one thought that I've had in terms of having a condition of approval on the long Del Monte Road. I think the other component that we haven't really addressed is the setback issue. And there's I think we need to determine whether we're comfortable with the 35-foot setback, which would be a reduction from the 50-foot that's currently there. And I think, staff, would you give us, what was your thought process on that again? I read it, but I don't remember.
It's really a matter of what design you prefer. If you prefer to have a wall at 50 feet, if you prefer to have a wall at perhaps the setback of 25 feet, and then have building setback a full 50 feet from the right-of-way line, then I would not grant that exception to allow them to have the reduced setback. As staff, and I'll speak for others, collectively, we think this kind of an approach where the buildings indeed are the perimeter walls really does do a better job of screening things that happen internally, And
Is there anything that allows, or not allows, anything that restricts them from doing anything other than landscaping within the setback? Within that 30, if we say 35 feet, are there other things like parking and those kinds of things that they could still do
yeah,
within
the
that
only thing that you
35 feet?
can't do within the setback is build a
Build a building, okay. So again, I think if we allow a 35-foot setback, which I think I'm comfortable with,
Is that what this view is?
yeah, with the buildings at 35 feet, I think we need to make sure that we make a condition that nothing other than landscaping can be within that 35 feet. And yeah, they're shaking their head, they're okay with that, so.
Mike, can you go back up to this one? So this section right here, this will be the same masonry wall that will go around the rest of the facility, or what's your plan with this, where the two buildings don't connect and there's that open corner?
That'd be like 8-foot masonry or stained concrete fence.
So it's solid.
Oh yeah, it's solid.
Is there anything you could do to make it match the other two walls? So there's no change at all?
Yeah, we can build it taller, we just have to build the structure differently, so the wind doesn't blow it over, because that's, the other buildings are 12 feet tall.
That way it wouldn't look like a,
Wouldn't they have
it
to
would look
get
like a complete L?
approval from the city council to do
Fence,
that?
it's up to you guys to get.
Wall that tall.
I don't know that the height of it matters so much as the material to me. I think it would be nice to allow them to do a 6-foot masonry fence that's actually masonry that matches the materials of the buildings itself. If they go bigger than 6 feet, it pushes them to the city council to get that approved, and I don't know that we need to do that.
It wouldn't be a big deal. at the
No, I'm
same
sure it
time,
wouldn't,
honestly,
but-
I think, but incidentally, I think the material, so just to make sure I understand, this is gonna be a CMU of some kind.
It's got a mixture of CMU and hardy siding.
It's gonna be CMU, 2 types, and hardy siding. It's gonna be a residential.
So you literally would be using the same materials to build this?
We can.
Or are you talking about the tilt-up precast kind of a thing?
We can do whatever you want there.
I think matching the materials.
I think matching the materials.
If it were a distinct material right there, I mean, this probably is one of the more prominent perspectives right on the corner, so.
We can make it match the building.
Yeah.
Cool.
And the height doesn't necessarily matter. It's
No.
just that I think we went this direction because we want to screen what's going on inside. So if 6 foot's not enough,
I think 6 foot would be fine. I don't know that
distance coming over to that hill.
I see any issue with it.
That's pretty high elevation right there, because you're coming up from Quail Hollow and you're coming up from Arrowhead the other direction. You're kind of at a summit where that corner would be anyways.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff or the applicant, or any further discussion? I guess, just to summarize then,
Getting the conditions, won't it?
well, that's what I want to make sure, so, and maybe Kim can help us with restating the conditions, but I think we talked about not allowing internally illuminated signage along Del Monte Road. I think we've talked about requiring the masonry wall at that intersection as a conditional use, as a condition of approval. And then the only other, to me, those are the only 2 conditions that I can
There
think
was
of.
the monument sign, that the signage will just be a monument sign on Arrowhead and on Del
On
Monte.
the Del Monte, okay, thank you.
And the landscaping.
And then limiting, yes, you're right, thank you, and then limiting only landscaping within the setback along those 2 frontages. Okay,
There's
Do
a
we
little bit
have
of
to-
parking, right, except maybe.
yeah, that's,
You're
and
not
that,
suggesting
I'm not suggesting that they can't do that there, no, that's, yeah, good catch, yeah.
I think that's what,
No, I think what I'm talking about is the area between the building and the sidewalk that we want to see landscaping all the way around.
that's what I thought you meant.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we need
He
to
reads my
address, excuse me, anything on the west side of the property?
Yeah, if you're comfortable letting us just kind of
Staff handles.
addressing that, and again, it's gonna be one of those 2 scenarios. Most likely, as we've heard tonight, with the wall outside the easement.
What do we do? What's that land for?
That is now incorporated into the subdivision next door. to-
Oh, is it? Okay, okay. And are they required, oh, thank you. And are they required to also put a fence there, or, I
Not
mean,
required.
but they could, but they don't need to, I guess.
People seem to.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's entirely up to them.
okay. And then do we have a consensus on the 35-foot versus 50-foot?
Yeah, I'm fine with
If
35.
that's the 35, that's the one I like.
I like the more landscaping than the wall and then a building. I prefer just the more landscape.
That's what I want. That looks great.
All right, any other questions or discussion? Otherwise,
Covers it.
otherwise I'd entertain a motion regarding the conditional use permit.
Well, if I don't have to repeat all those conditions, I'll make a motion that we approve all of the conditions that Bruce stated for this conditional use permit for this storage units.
Setback would be the set. Do we need to do a separate motion for those two things, or can we?
No, we just need commission condition.
And just that we are okay with it, we approve the 35-foot setback.
Okay.
All right, motion by Commissioner Tanner. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
A second by Commissioner Davis. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thanks for putting up with us. And thank you for coming. We really do appreciate the input and the feedback of the neighbors, really do. All right, next item on the agenda is Massive Fitness zone change.
Remember Griffles, right? They didn't have enough parking for the use on that site, so we developed a tool that allows you to consider sites on a site-by-site basis, determine if there's any merit potentially in allowing for a use to be approved even though they don't meet a requirement like parking. We also, in looking at the Robarge collision site this previous year, had a similar issue relative to landscaping, with a site that was largely already developed, and it didn't really seem very pragmatic to require that they meet the city's landscape requirements. So it's called a development enhancement overlay. It's a zoning mechanism that ultimately the city council can approve that lets the city allow uses that don't expressly and explicitly meet specific zoning provisions. You've probably heard that VASA is going to be leaving their current location in Spanish Fork. And they have plans to occupy the space that previously has been occupied by Fresh Market. And the maybe quickest way to describe the scenario that we have is that per Spanish Fork City's zoning ordinance, we don't require as much parking for a grocery store as we do a health club. In fact, the parking requirement's about twice for a health club what it is for a grocery store. And probably in future meetings, we'll talk about whether that makes a lot of sense, but that's how the code reads today. So when we were approached by the applicants here just a few weeks ago about this change that they'd like to make, we identified that issue that we have with this use on the existing site because the site with this use would not meet our parking requirements. So we're here tonight to ask you to make a recommendation on approving the development enhancement overlay so VASA could operate a health club in the Fresh Market space, even though they don't have 10 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of building space. Giving you quite a bit of information relative to the situation and the request. I'm going to leave a lot of that out right now, and we'll mention that I really appreciate the applicants providing the amount of information that they have relative to the proposal. To kind of cut to the chase, in short, I think we as staff really don't anticipate there being a parking problem with VASA occupying this space. given the number of parking spaces that are available in the center, the fact that shared parking, what the situation with the surrounding adjacent uses are and what those uses could be, and the capacity that we have on this site to add some parking in areas that previously with the grocery store needed to be utilized for loading docks and loading areas and that sort of thing that no longer need to be. As we add parking and account for actually how this health club will operate, which in my view is going to be different certainly than how Vasa currently operates, we don't think there's going to be a parking problem. To talk for a second about the difference between this facility and their current one, just speaking for myself, the current facility doesn't have a swimming pool, it doesn't have sports courts, and some different things like that, where simply put, you don't have as many people per square foot on the interior as you do where a facility maybe has much more of its proportionate space dedicated to machines and treadmills, different things where you really can have a lot of patrons under a roof at any particular time. Also, the applicants have provided information relative to some of their other facilities and just their simple peak hour demand for parking, which really suggests that our parking requirements are way out of whack, probably about twofold, and that, really having a parking requirement that's more akin to what we'd have for a grocery store makes more sense for this kind of use. So I want to make that as clear as I can that we're recommending that this be approved largely because we don't see there being a parking issue at this site with Vasa taking the space. At the same time, we are recommending that they do some things. I mentioned adding parking on the south side of the building being probably the biggest thing, to try to make sure still that we're doing everything that can be done to make sure that parking's not an issue. But let me also say that from my perspective, where we currently have this 50,000 square foot space in the community and in this particular shopping center that's vacant, finding tenants to occupy those spaces is a challenge. And, I think it's certainly worthy to consider what's best for some of those businesses in the center. And from my perspective, having this use there is an important component of keeping some of the other businesses healthy and vibrant and just able to enjoy the kind of traffic that anchor uses in shopping centers can deliver. So
you can go to Vasa and then walk over to Hoo Hot and get your fill. Is that what you're saying?
and if you didn't know this, Hoo Hot now has soft serve ice cream.
Yes, they do.
So
It's actually
really,
pretty
you can. You would expect there to be some benefit from having that kind of traffic driven through the center on a daily basis.
good. Well, there may be some changeover where a tenant like this draws, similar to what you have in their other facility, complementary uses.
Right. The last thing that I'll mention, just kind of relative to the concern that I don't have about there being a parking problem. Right now, the current Vasa site, it's a 30,000 square foot building, give or take, and there are additional uses in that building space aside from just Vasa. There are 4 other businesses there. And with that, there is as much parking per square foot available on that site now with those additional businesses there as well as what there would be on this new site if Vasa moved into it. So more parking available with the new site than what they have at the existing site, with less businesses. And honestly, I think as well that it's really worth considering what that new space is going to look like. It is going to be different in terms of just how space is allocated, and I think how many patrons realistically we could have at any given time. So,
Well, I can tell you the parking's at the old Vasa is packed all the time.
is it around on the backside too? I never see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It is.
It is on all sides.
Off the sides and on the back.
So, you got a question?
Especially in January.
Yeah. Got a question for you, Dave, while you're up. Just looking at the city's report and then comparing it against the analysis that Vasa gave us on their parking. City shows, or you guys say that currently there's 250 to 260 spaces there. And then the Vasa analysis says there's 316. Just wondering what the discrepancy, where the two numbers come from.
There are two separate main parcels there on the site, so it's part of that center. We don't see them unless you look at an aerial photograph that shows where the property lines go. So we did our count just based on the
Aerial?
Vasa parcel itself,
Okay.
whereas I think they're referring to the center as a whole.
Got that property line.
So our count is based on this,
Okay.
and their count is based on everything.
Okay.
And I think that's a fair way to count it. One thing also that I appreciate the applicants doing is helping us understand that they have all of the cross parking and cross access easements in place so that any Vasa patrons that wanted to park over here and walk to Vasa, they're perfectly entitled to do that, and vice versa. So I think it does actually make more sense to look at it as a whole than kind of the way we did with that initial read.
You mentioned this additional parking potential on the south side. Is that just along here? Is that, I mean, there's a pretty good grade differential here, so I don't know, you could get into that, but,
No need to change the curb line at all.
okay.
Yeah, so parking here
We don't want to.
and over there as well.
More likely staff, I would assume, that would park that back there and
Yep.
free up.
So
Any estimate on how many additional stalls that would pick up? Have you guys done a site plan on that?
50. If you just do the math of a 9-foot wide
9-foot
stall,
stall.
so you measure from that space, measure that span, divide it by 9, do some of the same things over there, it's more than
It
50.
says 70 parking spaces could be added on the south side.
No. Didn't pick up on that. Thank you. Okay, any other comments or questions for staff? Is there a deficiency in landscape as well then?
No, we're looking at it as a whole center from that perspective in particular, and they meet the 15% requirement. And this plays into that, really in a significant way.
Sure.
And incidentally, one other thing, and I think the applicants really are doing what they can to try to make this easy for the city to consider. One of the concerns that our Parks Department has is the landscaping out along this trail. You can kind of see where here it's being maintained differently than it is here. And already the applicant's property manager, after we discussed this in last week's DRC meeting, has contacted me about seeing what they need to do to improve their maintenance of this area here, and some different things like that. So I guess in terms of the concept of an enhancement, there are a few different ways maybe that we could look at it. And let me acknowledge that, from my perspective, really the biggest enhancement is getting a 50,000 square foot tenant in a building during a time where there aren't a lot of people looking for 50,000 square feet of space.
Well, and you think about the impact of a food for less for how many years sitting there. That's what you're suggesting as an enhancement, is that we're able to avoid that type of a scenario.
I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, like the Walgreens building, right? Different thing. Now Kmart. We have an opportunity to avoid that. I think that's important to consider.
So while we're looking at it, 9200 East, is that just gonna always dead end, or are there plans eventually is it possible to tie into Highway 6? And if not, why not, while we're at it, if that can never tie in, why not redesign this whole thing and add more parking, more landscaping, and just clean it up while we're at it?
But I have to laugh because I just spoke with a property owner in this development over here 3 hours ago about that. Several months ago, the city council vacated the portion of 920 East that basically goes north of this line. And when that finally takes effect, and the owners association of this office condominium development here have had to iron some things out so that we could give them half of that right of way. So
Where does the other half go?
to the other property owner. So with a vacation, center line gets split in two.
When you say the other property owner, thank you, it's that property owner there.
It would be, it's just the adjacent property owner. We did that after recently, in recent years, on several occasions, talking with UDOT about the prospect of making a connection to US 6, even if it was a right in and right out. We felt in particular like that would be a great asset to some of the businesses in this center. We just had another way to route traffic in and out. And I really appreciate that UDOT, I think, took that request very seriously. They studied it. They hired a consultant that looked at several different issues along the US 6 corridor, kind of from the hill going west. And in short, they made it very clear that they would not ever grant that connection. And that was when we said, okay. And I think kind of in an effort to show good faith to UDOT, that's when we said, all right, we'll take you seriously and we'll go ahead and vacate that. And hopefully something good will happen with some of that property now that it's been vacated. But it's a great question. And we're still working on finishing that up. But at some point in the future, that property line's going to change. And I would guess at some point in the future, that asphalt's going to go away as well. And might see something very different there.
But it's too early to, to Kevin's suggestion, if they're going to get half of that, let them design it, take it now and put it into parking or whatever, rather than have to do it later. Or is it too early to have that happen? Does that make sense?
I don't think it's too early, but these folks here that own this, I don't think are motivated at all to deal with it.
Okay.
Is my thought.
That's a separate property than the one that Voss is on.
I thought it was part of Vasa, but no.
Yeah, that's also, thanks for letting me point that out. So this parcel here is the Vasa parcel, if
Okay.
you will.
Okay.
And this is a separate one.
Okay.
So
What's happening with the gas station component of that?
that's going to be a third parcel. So that'll be subdivided off, and I'll let the applicant speak to that. They can tell you
Okay.
what exactly is going to happen there. But
Any other questions?
I got one that's not quite related, but what about that intersection? What's ever going to be done to improve that by the gas station?
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Is that on somebody's?
better than I do, I think, yeah.
Yeah, right here.
Well, actually, the next one.
You're talking about eight.
Talking
This one.
Yeah.
this one that gets worse with more traffic that comes
No
through.
roundabouts make everything right.
So, go
In my
ahead, go
opinion,
ahead.
the best thing for this intersection
Is
is
for-
getting Spanish Fork Parkway, if you can picture this, connected from Maple Mountain High School all the way through Legacy Farms and over the railroad tracks and done like that. Because until that's done, all of the growth out here, you guys know it, right? It's 4th North, and to get to US 6, it's 8th East, and I really think it's growth out here that is driving what Mr. Clark's going to talk about, just why that intersection gets worse and worse.
Can we hold off on that conversation until the end?
Yeah.
I think it's a good question, but I think it would be worth doing that. We need to do a public hearing for this, so I'd entertain a motion to move into public hearing.
Motion to move into public hearing.
Motion, I got a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody here that would like to address the commission on this issue? Please state your name.
My name's Kevin Hawkins, and together with Dave Gaskell, we're partnering on this project as the developers. I've been the preferred developer for Vasa for 20 years, and we appreciate staff's recommendation. We agree with it. We've been working with them very closely on it. I'll tell you one funny story, because I do so many of the gyms. I'll actually tell you two stories. One of them is, it's really funny to sit there in the parking lot of one of the gyms, and somebody will circle 3 times to wait for a parking spot to open next to the front door so they can go in and run 3 miles on the treadmill. Happens in every gym.
I'll tell you about a picture that I've seen, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so we almost always backfill a grocery store location. And most places in the United States and Utah, and we're developing in Utah, Colorado, Kansas, and all over, the standard retail parking criteria is usually 5 spots for every 1,000 square feet. And that's what grocery stores are. And that always fits the VASA's needs. So this is going to, as Mr. Anderson said, they're going from a 30,000 foot building to a 50,000 foot building. But when you add this large swimming pool, a large basketball court, racquetball courts, that's a lot of square footage, but not a lot of intense use. My guess is when you created that parking criteria for 10 to 1, for maybe a 2,000 foot Orange Theory or a 2,000 foot yoga studio or something, and they have a class at a certain time and they fill that 2,000 feet up, I could see where you might need 20 spots for something like that. But when you have this many square feet, and we put in your materials, we did peak hour of all their gyms, and especially in communities that are higher population than you are. And this is actually one of our better parking situations. And I think you can take some comfort when you have a sophisticated anchor tenant like this. They're much more concerned about the parking than you guys are, because it's lifeblood for their business, and they're not going to come in and into a situation where they would fail. So I'll be happy to answer any questions, but we appreciate staff's recommendation.
I would be most happy to approve this if I got my own elliptical machine that didn't squeak.
I didn't squeak.
How's that?
I think we can arrange that. This will have all brand new
You
equipment.
do that, you write that down in there,
Does VASA purchase, are they purchasing the building or leasing the building?
We're purchasing the building, we're purchasing it, and then we're leasing it to VASA.
Okay. How long is the lease going to be for?
15 years with 3 5-year options. And the gas pad, Dave and I also own the Macy's Shopping Center over on there. And so Macy's is Associated Foods, so is Fresh Market. So they wanted to keep that gas pad in operation. So we platted that as its own lot. They're going to brand it with Macy's so the people that shop at Macy's can get a discount on the gas. But we did put in that agreement that if they ever ceased using it as a gas pad, that it goes away and it becomes parking.
Great. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to come forward and ask a question or make a statement? You've sat there through the whole thing, man.
I think I got some wrong information, but this is,
Okay.
I'm here for something different.
Oh, we'll talk to you after.
Sounds good.
Okay. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to exit public hearing. Come on, people.
Oh, sorry, wake up.
Wake up.
Make a motion, we exit.
The game has started, apparently, right? So,
Second.
okay, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion about this zone change?
I'm just curious, and it's not related to the zone change. Do we know what plans are for the current VASA building, the storehouse building?
No,
Okay.
we don't.
So that,
We
The answer was no, because he's not at the microphone.
okay.
Great. Any other comments or questions?
If it was any way possible, and this contradicts the parking problem, but I would like to see a little more greenery in the parking lot, more like you have in some of the newer developments, you know,
Costco.
like Canyon Creek, you know, and maybe not to that level because it does complicate the parking that's already a problem, but I don't know.
You know, it's an interesting thing. They have these little squares, and my experience as an architect is that they don't grow very well, especially here in Utah. I mean, I remember even in San Diego where I started practice, you'd have a large planter area here with trees that were just like the same thing here, and these would be twice the size as the ones here. So,
Is that all the heat and stuff?
yeah, it's the heat island effect. Yep.
I think water too, you only get,
Yeah, probably so. You get the additional water from the grass, and yeah.
you gentlemen aren't planning on repaving the parking lot and that kind of a thing at this point in time. So one thought that I wondered the same thing. And this would require us somehow as staff to come up with a way to kind of bird dog this scenario. But let's say that they plan to repave the parking lot, reconstruct it in 7 years. And let's say that in 7 years, clearly there's excess parking space. What if then we revisited the issue and talked about how to add some landscape islands and different things like that? We did that with the part of the Kmart Center that's just to the west of Kmart, I want to say maybe 10 years ago. And we might have been a little bit less effective with that than we could have been, but we've done that before. That way, the applicants would maybe be making some of those improvements when it'd be a little bit more practical and just easier to do it. Adding landscaping is easy, except when you've got to cut up a parking lot to get irrigation to it and those kinds of things. And
Are there trees in the planters that abut the front end of that currently? I mean, it looks like there's one there, but, I mean, even just having those planters with actually trees might be enough to, which I realize.
The lone tree.
The lone tree, yeah.
I'll bet there were trees there at one point.
I'll bet there were too, yeah. Yeah, that certainly is an option as well.
Is that something
We'll be happy to look at that, but Dave's exactly right. You don't want to go cutting up a parking lot and
Yeah.
trench it.
Yeah, there's some impracticalities there, so you better come forward if you're going to talk some more.
If there's irrigation already in those islands, we'll be happy to enhance those landscape islands.
Freshen them up.
I think that's what I would put. I think that's a good compromise to add, make sure we have trees that are added to those front
Like that.
islands.
I got one other question. If you could, well, this view's okay. But in this, the question I have is with really all grocery stores right here in the main entry. Is there something that keeps, I mean, what if you stop the traffic from driving through it? This seems like a dangerous place in all grocery stores. Right when you come out the door, you got people, driving through there. And it puzzles me why they can't stop that traffic from flowing through there. Is it fire? Is it flow of, does that make sense? So here comes a car, but they can only go into the parking lot. They can't come across here. Am I making sense at all?
Part of the fire code, what you're saying, you have to have a certain width and it has to
Go through.
It's a fire code. Now the pavement width is there. People have a tendency to drive maybe a little faster. I've seen speed bumps and cross hatching for pedestrian.
Raised like intersection things.
Like they call them tables, traffic tables or something like that. We only generate about half the traffic a grocery store does on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
What is the motion?
Recommend approval or denial to the zone change for the property.
I'll make a motion that we approve the zone change for the Vasa property, or was that?
We're recommending to the city council.
I recommend that we approve the zone change for the Vasa site.
Were there any conditions, Dave, that the staff had on that? I don't remember.
There's
Do you want to make the
there's three
landscaping?
conditions.
Just the landscape.
First condition that we have in staff report is
I read it, my mind's just kind of foggy for some reason.
Adding parking to the south side of the building, the applicants have said they're happy to do that, maintaining the landscaping along US 6. And if you wanted them to plant trees in those planters in front of the building, that might be a third, but
Yeah, I think if we can add that as any planter
Do you have to
without trees.
mention the development enhancement overlay too in this, that we're using?
that is specifically the zone that we're talking
That's
about.
the zone that we're changing, okay.
All right, so we have a motion from Commissioner Tagg with the 3 conditions plus 1.
Plus one, the enhanced landscaping where the planters currently are, and if at a future date they redo the parking lot. to consider additional landscape.
Got a motion from Commissioner Tagg. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Tanner. Any further discussion? Nope. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a question that Commissioner Tanner had.
What's the timeline on the project?
Open before
Brad.
December 31st.
Is this going to raise my rates?
You're
Yeah,
fine.
you seconded it.
Kim was just asking who seconded
Okay,
it.
just want to make sure.
99 a month, or 19.
So start opening this year, the end of December?
We're shooting to have them open by January.
Nice.
You're still going to open up,
That'd be a good time.
you're still going to open up at 4:30, right?
I'm sorry?
You're still going to open up at 4:30, right?
I think so. Kevin would be better at answering the early morning
All right,
hours.
so should we make a motion to conclude, and then we can address the question
okay.
that we have, and then that clears the